Go ahead and grab a seat, and as you do, go ahead and find your Bible if you brought one. If not, I'd encourage you to get out your phone and find one there. You can begin making your way to 1 Thessalonians, the little letter in the New Testament, kind of toward the end there. And so we don't want to waste any time. That's where we're heading. We are in a series we started a couple weeks ago called Living Hope, and we're going to be walking through both this letter, this first letter to the Thessalonians, and the second one as well. And as you are turning there, this week, my daughter Ava, she's our second oldest, told me about something that had happened this week at school. And I'm sure you can probably relate to this situation. Well, maybe not all of it, because it's kind of a new world that school looks like. But she said, Dad, in my Zoom class, one of my Zoom classes this week, our teacher put us into breakout rooms. And she paused the conversation at that point, and she said, you know what those are, right? And I said, yes, I know what Zoom breakout rooms are. For those of you that don't, there's you're on the call and you get put into little groups within that. And so she said before she did, my teacher assigned one of the boys, and I was with all boys, by the way, assigned one of the boys to be the leader of the breakout group. And then as soon as we got into this breakout room, they just started talking about things I didn't even know what they were talking about. They were just talking about video games or, I don't know, but they weren't doing the work that we were supposed to be doing. And she's like, Dad, he was made the leader, but he wasn't leading at all. He kept asking me what we were supposed to do and what I needed to, and he's like, I felt like I was the leader, even though he was the one who was called the leader. And I said, well, sweetie, that is a good life lesson, okay? Because you're going to encounter plenty of situations where there's somebody who maybe has the title leader, but isn't exactly doing much of a job of leading at all. Today's sermon, as we continue in the book of 1 Thessalonians, we're calling Leadership Lessons. The full title, if I was to give it a wordier title, would be Leadership Lessons from a Godly Leader. What we're going to see here is, as Paul continues in this letter, he sort of goes into a little bit of an autobiography sort of section here, kind of speaks to his own leadership, his own leading with the church, and he's addressing and sort of giving us a great model of what it looks like to be a godly leader. You know, I've said it before, but leadership, I think in our present culture, has sort of fallen on hard times. I think good leaders can be hard to find. Godly leaders can be even harder to find. Many of us experience this, right? So many of the leaders that we thought were good or thought were godly, we've watched fail. And so that sort of breaks a bit of our trust in leadership. Especially we tend to remember those situations more. So we may have encountered lots of great, godly, or good leaders in our life, although the ones that kind of fall short tend to stick out in our mind. I think oftentimes we see leaders leading from not a place of health, but a place of perhaps personal pride or personal motivation or personal gain or whatever it might be. There's lots of reasons why people lead. Well, I would say at the outset that as we think about leadership this morning, you might already be tempted to check out and be like, well, I'm not really much of a leader. I'm more of a follower. I tend to be part of sort of the crowd, and that's not really my job to be out in front of people. I would just like to kind of define leadership for us this morning as this. Leadership, I think, is best defined as influence. Leadership really is influence. And so what we're talking about when we talk about leadership, and as we're going to see here as Paul models leadership for the church, we're not talking about just a position or a title, someone who's in a particular role. In the situation that Ava experienced this week, the breakout leader had the title of leader, but was doing very little to lead or influence the group in any sort of positive way. Your ability to lead others really comes down to your ability to influence others. And that really is what every leader does. A leader influences, whether good or bad, right? Whether toward a good mission or toward a bad mission. I mean, think about some of the strongest leaders, whether they've been good or bad, they've influenced people in a particular direction. And so think back perhaps on your life. Maybe who's been a leader that you've seen? Have you had a coach or a teacher or perhaps one of your parents modeled leadership for you? a boss or a pastor or somebody, I'll just ask, is that anything I did? Or is that just a freak thing? Okay. You all heard that, right? My voice went out for a minute. Okay. I'm just not going to pretend that didn't happen. I just want to make sure that I didn't break anything here, lest that. Okay, cool. Well, we'll just hope that doesn't happen again. That's going to get really, that would get old quickly. But think back on perhaps when you have seen good or even bad leaders, right? Every situation, it's been a position of influence. There's been somebody, and maybe you've been on a team or you've been a part of a workplace where the main leader or the person who's influencing wasn't even sitting at the top. There was somebody leading from a different chair, and you could kind of see the way that is. So here's what I would say, is that all of us, probably in some form, fashion, function, in some role in our life, are leading somebody somewhere. And that's really the best test of leadership. You might call yourself a leader or think of yourself as a leader. I would just encourage you to turn around and see who's following you. Who are you influencing? What kind of influence are you having on those around you? What we see here from the Apostle Paul is he's a godly leader. And the big idea that we're going to see in this passage, you can jot this down. I'd encourage you to take some notes on this, but it's this, is that through godly leadership, you can lead others to hope in Christ. Through godly leadership, you can lead others to hope in Christ. And what Paul is doing in this section, and we're going to cover most of chapter 2 today, but he's speaking to his own leadership within the church. And as he does so, he's calling others to lead and to influence and to pour into others in the same way. And we don't exactly know why he sort of goes into this here. I'm guessing it's pretty important. It's one of the first things that he sort of addresses in this letter. And so best guess is we can assume that perhaps Paul's character was being attacked. Not necessarily by people inside the church, because Timothy brings back this great report. Like as you read through, we're going to go through it today, you don't really get the sense that they're questioning his leadership, but you maybe get the sense that others are questioning his leadership. And so Paul is giving a defense for those claims. And as he has said many times before, as we saw even last week, he's really saying, hey, follow me as I follow Christ. I'm going to lead you in this way of leadership. And you know how I led when I was there, so follow these types of leaders and seek to be this type of leader in your life. And so godly leaders, they lead through others to hope in Christ. What we're going to see is 5 ways that godly leaders lead toward hope in Christ. That's where we're going. Let me pray that God would teach us now as we get into his word together right now. Our God, we thank you for this morning, as we do each and every week. God, thankful for another week, thankful for another Sunday, thankful for another opportunity, God, to open up your word together. And God, we know that this is different. This isn't just a book or some musings or thoughts. This isn't even just like other leadership lessons, but God, these are leadership lessons from you. And what does it mean to be a godly man, a godly woman, and to influence and lead others toward hope in you? And God, that's what we're seeking after this morning. We want hope for ourselves. We want to point others toward the hope that's found in you. And so, God, I just ask that you would teach us now. We open up our ears and open up our hearts to receive what you have for us this morning. God, this is the posture of our hearts now. And so we pray that you would teach us. In the name of your Son, Jesus, amen. All right, well, let's look at the passage together and we'll walk our way through. Let me start with just the first 2 verses. 1 Thessalonians, beginning chapter 2, verse 1, it says this, "For you yourselves know, brothers and sisters, that our coming to you was not in vain. But though we had already suffered and been shamefully treated at Philippi, as you know, we had boldness in our God to declare to you the gospel of God in the midst of much conflict." All right, so godly leaders leading others towards hope in Christ. 5 things that godly leaders do, 5 marks. Godly leaders lead others toward hope in Christ by bold proclamation, not selfish scamming. Paul, as he goes through this, is going to kind of put together these antitheses. Like he's sort of going to present the positive and he presents the negative, or he presents the negative and presents the positive. Here he starts with the negative. He says, listen, brothers, sisters, you know that our coming to you was not in vain. There was purpose and function behind it. There was truth. There was a realness to our ministry. So we didn't come in vain, but though we had already suffered and been shamefully treated at Philippi, as you know, we had boldness in our God to declare to you the gospel. So the main thing that marks the ministry that Paul had there, Paul and Silas and the others had there with this new church, was bold proclamation of the gospel, of God's word. And there was, the deck was stacked against them to be able to do this. He mentions there, he says, as you already know, or as you know, we had already suffered and been shamefully treated at Philippi. If you are not familiar with the story, which you may not be, it's found in Acts 16, if you want to do some homework. The last part of Acts 16 gives the background to what happened right before coming to Thessalonica. You may remember this from the flannel graph. I feel like this is a good flannel graph story, but Paul and Silas were doing ministry in the city of Philippi. And in the process, God began to move and people began to respond, and the city didn't like that too much, and so they were arrested. They were dragged into the marketplace before the rulers. They were charged with disturbing the peace and advocating unlawful customs, and it ended up kind of swelling to the point that the crowd attacked them, stripped off all of their clothes, and beat them with rods. They in turn were then thrown into prison. Their feet were put in stocks, and they were denied the rights to which they were entitled to as Roman citizens. And if you remember the way that the story goes, what happened next is they were sitting in prison. They're singing hymns and praising God in the midst of this persecution and unlawful, unrighteous treatment that they had just endured. And this earthquake came. It shook open the doors of the prison. Their shackles, their locks fell off of them. And the jailer was so freaked out. He thought he woke up and saw all the doors open. He thought for sure he just lost all of his prisoners. And so he gets ready to take his own life. And they're like, hey, don't do that. We're still here. And the jailer responds, how do I become saved? What must I do to be saved? And God worked in his heart and brought him to a place of salvation. And so they are fresh off of this experience. They leave from Philippi and they make their way to Thessalonica. And so you can imagine as Paul and Silas get there, again, their clothes were stripped off, they were beaten with rods, they were thrown in prison. They're probably still healing from that. There was probably some scars still being formed, some bruises that were still going down. There wasn't even full healing from this last opportunity that they had to share the gospel. And says, look, though we already suffered and we've been shamefully treated, right? Our rights were denied as Roman citizens. We still, when we came, we had boldness in our God to declare to you the gospel of God in the midst of much conflict. And we know that conflict arose there as well. We've already talked about this, but the city didn't respond too well again when they began to proclaim the gospel. And they said, who is this false God that you are pointing people to? Who is this Jesus Christ that you would say is Lord over all? There wasn't a great response to that. And so the first mark of godly leaders leading towards others in hope in Christ is through bold proclamation of the gospel and not in selfish scamming. You see, that is sort of the background that Paul puts it in. He says, listen, you know that we didn't come in vain. We didn't come here for ourselves. This wasn't some major scam that we're kind of rolling into town and trying to get everybody tricked into this thing. We came here with the truth. And what we did is at cost to ourselves, to our very livelihood, to our physical beings, we proclaimed the gospel that you might hear the good news of Jesus Christ. We proclaimed it there in Philippi in conflict. We proclaimed it here in conflict. Why? Because we believe it. We believe it. And I would just say this, is that sometimes I think a mistake that has been sort of promoted in the church, maybe just kind of the way that we have done things, or maybe just kind of our own thinking, but we think that when we read declare, proclaim, preach the gospel, that is the pastor's job to do from the pulpit, and he's the one who sort of preaches the gospel. And if that's your thinking, I would just say that that's not what the Bible would present as proclaiming, declaring, preaching the gospel. We're all called to be preachers of the gospel. We're all called to proclaim and declare with bold proclamation the gospel of God in our lives. So in this sense, what I would say is that all of us have been called to preach the gospel wherever we go. You are called to declare the gospel in your life, and we need to do so with boldness and with conviction. Notice that all the reasons that Paul and Silas would have had to maybe just kind of take it easy for a bit, like why don't we just sort of ease into this? Why don't we have some sort of secret meetings here? Why don't we, kind of gather a few people together? That's not what they did at all. They went straight to the synagogue, 3 days. They were boldly proclaiming the gospel of God. They knew exactly what kind of conflict was going to arise from that. And I think about some of my own excuses that I've used to sort of get out of sharing or declaring the gospel at times. Well, I don't know if there's really time, or I don't know how they're going to respond, or I don't really want to offend, or maybe they're going to think I'm weird, or maybe, when you compare sort of the excuses that you and I might give to the excuses that Paul and Silas had to maybe not proclaim the gospel so boldly, it just seems kind of foolish at times. Now, I realize that there are real consequences in our life at times when we proclaim the gospel. Some of you have given up relationships with family or friends. Others of you have put your job in jeopardy to do that. I'm not saying that there is no conflict or there are no reasons. I'm just saying sometimes I think what we do is we sort of have this kind of timid mindset, this sort of sheepish approach to proclaiming the gospel, and that's not what the godly leaders that we see in the Bible did. There was a boldness there. And I think there's more and more need, and there's going to be more and more opportunity for us to have bold proclamation of the gospel in our lives. It's going to get harder, not easier. There's going to be more and more conflict that's going to arise from that. We can see where our culture, not just here in these United States of America, but in our world right now, where it is trending, where it's heading, it's always moving away from the truth of God's word. And so we're called to do this, and not just to be a poser or a scammer or kind of, part of it true for us, but not really kind of working. It's all of it. Like there's bold proclamation because it's not just for show. We believe this. This is what godly leaders do. Let me give you the second one, and I'll show it to you in God's word. Godly leaders lead toward hope in Christ by, number 2, faithful stewardship, not misguided priorities. Faithful stewardship, not misguided priorities. Look at verse 3 here. It says, "For our appeal does not spring from error or from impurity or any attempt to deceive, but just as we have been approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel, so we speak, not to please man, but to please God who tests our hearts." Godly leaders lead by faithful stewardship, not misguided priorities. Notice the way that Paul describes the preaching. He says, "It came to you, brothers, sisters, as an appeal." It says, "For our appeal does not spring from error or impurity or any attempt to deceive." Make no mistake, faithful preaching, faithful proclamation of God's word calls for a response. It calls for a change. As we proclaim the gospel in our lives, we would do best to call toward a response in that. Like, hey, what are we going to do with this? Like, how are you going to respond to that? Like, that is what biblical godly teaching should move us toward, is action and change and application. We say this all the time, right? We're not hurting for necessarily knowledge. We're hurting for application of God's word. Even the Great Commission, it says, teaching them to what? Observe all that I have instructed, all that I have commanded, that we would observe it, that there would be change. And so he's appealing to them as he comes. He says, for our appeal, this call to action, this call to response that we had for you as we came into the city, it doesn't spring from error or impurity or any attempt to deceive. He's like, it was true. It was real. This was the truth that we were preaching. And the reason that we can rest on that and know that or why we were able to proclaim the truth in such a way is because the number one reason for our proclamation was to please God and not man. He says, listen, I am a God pleaser, not a people pleaser. And I wonder, do you tend to be a God pleaser in your life or a people pleaser? It's so easy for us oftentimes to please others by either saying the things they want to hear or not saying the things that they don't want to hear. But that is not what God's word calls us to, right? What Paul was saying there as he was with them is he was saying the things that they maybe didn't want to hear, but they needed to hear. And Paul had absolutely nothing to gain by this. See, there is a freedom when you understand that you are accountable to God and to God alone in that. There was nothing to gain for him except for his accountability to the Lord. He says, listen, I did this not to please you. I wasn't trying to please man, but to please God who tests our hearts. And he recognizes this, that he is a steward of this gospel. Notice that word there in verse 4. It says, just as we have been approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel. He sees it as something that has been handed to him and that he has to take special care of, that he has to walk with and steward and guard and use in such a way. This message of hope, this message of God's love and salvation for mankind through the person of Jesus Christ. Well, what does it mean to be entrusted with something? Do we feel this as followers of Christ? Certainly, I hope we feel this as a church. You know, one of the things we talked about when we moved into this building, which is now, we're coming up on 2 years that we've been in this space, which is crazy. It's been a long 2 years. But do we feel, as we moved in, we talked about that this is a tool to be stewarded, to be used. We've been entrusted with this. And are we using it for ministry? I'll tell you, I feel this real heavy burden that we have this space, we have this land, we have all these things that we need to be using as much of it as we can at all times for the best purposes for the gospel. Like that is what we see. And so when the lights are off, when the building's empty, when things aren't being used, I feel like, what are we doing? We got to be doing something. Not that we're just trying to hear me. I'm not trying to fill everybody's schedule and just kind of, create unnecessary things, but it's like, hey, if we can do something with that, if there's more that we can get out of that, if there's still, like, as I like to say, more meat on the bone, then can we do more with what God's entrusted to us? Would we feel this stewardship? Certainly this week, I feel this burden, this pressure. We all should. Hopefully you feel it too, not just me, that we have 1,100 boxes of food coming. 34,000 pounds of food. Hopefully we feel like a stewardship around that. We can't just let that go to waste. Are we going to use it? Who are we giving it to? How are we giving it to them? Is there more that we can do with that? We've been talking about, like, can we put some more information on the box? Do we put other things in there? How do we, we want to steward all these relationships. You see, Paul feels that. He says, listen, we've been approved by God and entrusted with this gospel. So as a result of that, we speak. We speak, not to please man, but to please God who tests our hearts. Godly leaders are faithful stewards, not operating with misguided priorities. It would be misguided to look at and see the people around and try and do it for them or to please them. So I would just ask this, if you are a follower of Jesus, you have been entrusted with the gospel, where are you entrusted to steward that gospel in your life? Where is it that you have the unique opportunity to carry the gospel with you? For those of you that are mom or dad, you have a unique opportunity in your home. You've been entrusted with these little lives, and there's only so many years that you get with them in your home. How are you using those years to model and to pour into and to instruct in the gospel? As you walk into your workplace, as you go to your job, as you log into your Zoom meeting, how are you stewarding the gospel as you go into that? Every opportunity, every gym that you walk into, every coffee shop, every restaurant, every store, are you looking around and saying, God, how am I stewarding this opportunity for the gospel right now? And I know there's part of us that's like, well, that sounds exhausting. Like that sounds like a lot of work. Isn't there like an off time or a downtime? And yes and no. Like, I think we're going to be in prayer constantly. We're constantly asking God the question is, what would you have for us? How would we do this? It's not that we're like constantly preaching, but we're constantly looking and on the lookout for, are there opportunities? Is there something here? Is there something that I'm called to do through this? And so would we view all of the interactions that we have throughout the week with that lens? Could I just encourage you with maybe one simple change that you could do in this is that you would start to pray for the meetings or conversations that you have. I've been doing this for a long time. Before I meet with someone or talk with someone, sometimes it's a quick prayer, sometimes it's a longer, but I'll often just ask, God, would you use this conversation? Could I in some way encourage, instruct, and point toward the gospel, point them toward you? Would you use this opportunity here? I see each of those conversations as a God-given opportunity to be faithful steward of the gospel in that moment. God's calling us toward these things and to do these things together. This is what a godly leader does. Faithful stewardship, not misguided priorities. We're not just doing it to please and kind of placate others. We're doing it unto the Lord. Number 3, godly leaders lead toward hope in Christ by gentle care, not personal gain. Gentle care, not personal gain. Look at verse 5. For we never came with words of flattery, as you know, nor with a pretext for greed. I love that, as you know, like as if it's like almost like an inside joke there. You know that we weren't flattering you, okay? We were just shooting straight with you. Okay? There was no flattery happen. You remember that, right? Nor with a pretext for greed. God is witness. Verse 6, nor did we seek glory from people, whether from you or from others, though we could have made demands as apostles of Christ, but we were gentle among you, like a nursing mother, taking care of her own children. So, being affectionately desirous of you, we were ready to share with you not only the gospel of God, but also our own selves, because you had become very dear to us. I love this picture of the Apostle Paul saying this. See, that title of apostle, there weren't very many people that carried that title around. That was a direct commission from Jesus Christ to build and to entrusted with the gospel and to build up the church. Like this, there was just a few people that were referred to as apostles in the day. And Paul was one of them. And he's like, listen, I could have come down. I could have thrown down my credentials and sort of demanded, hey, listen to me, kind of thrown my weight around. That's kind of the feeling there is I could have come in and sort of pushed around a little bit. But he's like, I didn't do that. We didn't come in. Even as he wrote this letter, remember, it says Paul, Silas, and Timothy. He doesn't ever even point to his credentials. He doesn't even refer to himself as an apostle there. He's like, I could have done that. That would have been fine. That would have been right. But no, how did we come in? We did it with gentleness. We were gentle among you. And then he goes on, like a nursing mother taking care of her own children. Is there a more nurturing picture of a mom with her newborn baby, nursing, taking care of her kids? He's like, that's how we were with you. The Apostle Paul, the same guy who just stood up and was beaten in the marketplace by the crowds, thrown in prison. He came in, he's like, listen, we were gentle. We were gentle care. And I love verse 8. It says, so being affectionately desirous of you. He's saying, listen, we loved you. We do love you. We still love you. We love you. And we need to get better at telling each other that we love each other. Like in a good, healthy community sort of, I mean, like when you hear that, somebody says it, maybe sometimes if somebody's like a friend, you know, like you expect it from your mom, right? Like, hey, I love you too. You know, like you expect that. But when somebody like a friend, and maybe they've never really said it before, and they say, hey, I love you. And you're like, thanks, you know, like, and some of you maybe grew up and you're like, we didn't really say that, like that word didn't get thrown around our house, and so you're kind of like, you don't know what to do, you're sort of pinned or sort of caught, but there should be this ability to share and express, and maybe we do it differently with each other, but that there is this affectionate desire for one another, that we truly do care for and love each other. He says, we were ready to share with you not only the gospel of God, right? We're not just giving you the word of God, the story of Jesus and what he's done and the call for transformation in your life. We were ready to give you the gospel of God. Not just that, but our very selves, because you had become very dear to us. See, he's like, we didn't just have a Bible lessons for you, which are great. Bible lessons are fantastic, but we also came just giving of ourselves. We opened up ourselves to you. And we poured out ourselves for you. Is this your heart towards others? Are you willing to pour yourself out to those around you? This is what a godly leader does. Small group leaders, are you willing to pour yourselves out for those in your small groups? Classroom leaders down in our kids' ministry, are you willing to pour yourself out for those kids? If you're a ministry team leader, if you have a Bible study that you're doing, if you have a group of people that you're discipling or walking alongside, are you willing to pour yourself out for others? Listen, one of the things you've probably, maybe you've never picked up, or hopefully you have, I rarely try and use myself as the hero of an illustration, okay? Because I realize and recognize that I have far more that I can grow in, and that I need to change than I've gotten down. But if I could, for a second, I would say this, that this is something that God has grown in me over the years. This love for God's church and his people, this is the reason that my wife and I felt so called towards church planting, is because we wanted to see God do a new work and we wanted to pour ourselves out. And so without even knowing who we were moving to or where we were going, we sold everything. We packed it all up in pods, all the stuff that we had left, and we moved not knowing where we were going to go. And we came here to see a new church established because we knew that God was doing something here. And I would include my wife and kids in this, I would say that I have learned by God's grace, humbly, hear humility in this, that I have learned how to pour myself out for others. Myself, my wife, our kids, we pour ourselves out for this church. And make no mistake, the reason that we do it is because we genuinely love you. Like, I love you as your pastor. I care so deeply for this congregation, for this community, for this church. And I'm not alone in this. I'm not the only person doing this. There are many, many others in this church who are pouring themselves out. And it looks different in different people. There are people throughout this church who are giving of themselves in such significant ways. And what I would say is this, is that as I've learned to do that, as God has grown that in me, because I wasn't always that way, as God has grown that in me, I have seen so much return on investment. As I invest in others and in those relationships, I find myself so blessed and so challenged and so encouraged in those relationships together. Could I just encourage us in this church to increase and ramp this up together? That we would grow in our affection for one another, that we would become dear to one another, that we would increase in our relationships with one another. But one of the ways that we do that is by pouring ourselves out, that we would share our very selves with one another. And what you're going to find, I told the team as we were getting ready this morning, is that you're going to be really, really tired. Like as you do that, it's going to make you tired, but it's like the good kind of tired. You know when you get into bed after the end of like a long day, but it's like a good day and you're like exhausted and you're like, I'm tired, but it's the good kind of tired. That's the kind of tired I hope we feel often. Because we're pouring yourselves out, and I promise you, God will fill that cup right back up. He gives you, he'll supply everything that we need. This is what godly leaders do. So hear me. I'm not saying that I'm perfect in this. I still have more and more to grow, but I would say this. If there's one area in this little list here that I could say, follow me as I follow Paul, as he follows Christ, I'm working on this, and I'm just telling you, it has such a major impact. Let's do this together. Let's enjoy and kind of participate in this together. Let me go on. Let's look at the next one. Is that clear? Is that okay? Can I use that again in the second service? No? Okay. If not, tell me afterwards. I don't want that to be ever misunderstood. I said I don't ever use myself as a hero. I'm not trying to say I'm a hero. I'm just saying God's blessed me through that. So I just want to be crystal clear on that. You're like, man, he really thinks he's doing a good job with that. Well, I'm working on it, okay? I'm working on it. Number 4, blameless content, not baseless burden. Blameless content, not blameless conduct, not baseless burden. Look at verse 9. For you remember, brothers, our labor and toil. Do you remember that? You remember the way that we worked when we were there? We worked day and night that we might not be a burden to any of you while we proclaim to you the gospel of God. You are witnesses, and God also, how holy and righteous and blameless was our conduct toward you believers. Day and night, they labored not to be a burden. See, here's the thing. They were blameless in their conduct toward the church and with the church. And day and night, and it was his right, as Paul, as he's teaching there in the synagogue, it was totally customary, totally normal. It would have been very acceptable for him to be sort of compensated for his teaching. It would have been very commonplace. Like you go to a restaurant, you should, I hope you do, you tip your server. That's sort of how it worked. Like if you went and you heard some teaching, you would often sort of tip the guy that was teaching. And so he could have made a living that way, but he didn't. He didn't want it to be in any way misunderstood. And so what he did is he worked day and night. And so he's up early in the morning, staying up late. And he refers to it in some of the other letters. He was a tent maker, which means he probably worked with leather. That was kind of the go-to material. And so he's this leather worker, and he's up late at night, early in the morning, working with the leather, trying to make a living, make a wage, so that he wouldn't burden any of them in the process. And he did this so that they were as above reproach in everything, that nobody would have this claim, hey, you're just trying to make a buck here. You're just trying to kind of get something from us here. And he's like, no. We did this so that we could be blameless in our conduct, that no one would be able to say that. And I love what he says there. He says, you saw, right? He's like, you were witnesses. You saw, but not just that, but God also saw what? That we were holy, righteous, and blameless in our conduct toward the believers. The big thing that you could say there is that nothing stuck. If they were trying to attack him, that it wasn't sticking because it wasn't true. They were blameless in their conduct. And how many of us could make that same statement? Notice I used an example in the previous one, not this one. This is a high calling, right? Holy, righteous, blameless, not just before people, but before God. He's like, God himself sees and knows this. Would we be able to say this about our conduct in public? That as we're living out our lives before our neighbors, before our friends, before our family, that we would be able to say that we are blameless in conduct, holy, righteous, blameless. But more than that, would we be able to say that we are blameless in our conduct, not just in public, but in private, in those places where God only sees and God only knows? Listen, we have to have a firm and resolved commitment toward holiness in our lives, in every aspect, in the seen and in the unseen areas. Would you be able to say that today about your conduct, both in public and in private, that it is holy, it's blameless, and it's righteous? Now hear me again, I'm not saying that we are without sin, but are we moving in that direction? Are we allowing God to convict and to challenge and to change and to shape? And are we repenting where that's needed? Are we confessing where that's needed? Are we going back to the cross where that's needed? Are we responding to the gospel of God in our lives, both in private and in public? You see countless examples of private sins that are eventually come out, that are found out and destroy lives. We see that now, we see that in Scripture. In Numbers, it says this, be sure your sin will find you out. Make no mistake that even the smallest, littlest secret sin left to fester, left to grow, left to go unchecked, it will come back and wreak havoc later. That is what sin does. And so Paul, one of the things that he does, by the grace of God, with the help of the Holy Spirit, he is growing in his conduct, and he was able to say, our conduct is blameless toward you believers. What a high calling. I've been so struck by that this week, looking at that and just saying, how do you get there? How does one do that? And I would just say that it is through a constant pursuit, a constant listening to the Spirit, a constant following, and walking in step with the Spirit. Would we pursue after that? And the last, we see godly leaders lead others toward hope in Christ through clear instruction, not unfair expectations. He says, for you know, like a father with his children, we exhorted each one of you and encouraged you and charged you to walk in a manner worthy of God, who calls you into his own kingdom and glory. Before he was comparing himself to a father or to a mother, now he's comparing himself to a father. The key difference here is mothers were seen as that primary nurture, that carer, the gentle. Fathers, the role that they took in the home was this. It was one of instruction. and one of raising up. You didn't just send them off to school. Dad was sort of in charge of making sure that the lessons got taught, that the children grew up and understood and knew what they needed to know for life. Like that was the role that dad took in the home. And he says, listen, we were this way with you. Like a father with his children, we taught you, we trained you, we exhorted you, we encouraged you, we charged you to do what? To walk in a manner worthy of God. He's called you into his own kingdom. He's called you into his glory, and so walk like it. And notice, it wasn't with unfair expectations. It would be crazy for me to expect things of my kids if I slap down a math problem and say, hey, figure this out, and they've never learned it, right? They don't know what they don't know. They can't just kind of figure that out. They need to be taught. They need to be instructed. They need to learn these things. You have to show them. And so that is how we want to do that here in our church. As you're leading others, would you not have unfair expectations of them, but that we would train, that we would instruct, that we would exhort? This is calling for change to come, that you would encourage, that you would support and meet them where they're at and the work that they're doing, and that you would charge them, that you would commission them toward the work that's coming ahead, that we would be and that we would know that we can share with others in this the kingdom that God has called us to, this glory that he's called us to. You know, I have a vision for our small groups that we would continue to grow those into a place of very real and true discipleship. I think sometimes small groups are that. There's plenty of times that small groups aren't, and mine included. Like sometimes we're like really killing it in that discipleship piece. We're instructing, encouraging, exhorting. Other times we're just kind of like, we had a night. It wasn't bad. It wasn't, it was okay. But like, I want our small groups to be a place that there's real discipleship, that there's growth, that we can see, that we can look back and we can say, yeah, over the last year, I've learned this and I've been challenged by this and I've been encouraged that. I don't have exactly how the way to get there other than if we're all sort of like have that as our target, leaders and members, that if we're going after that, I think it's a great place to be able to do that. Maybe for some of you, that's the reason you've been reticent to get into a small group because you haven't actually seen that happen there. I believe that we can do that as leaders are committed to this, as we commit to this together, that there would be training, exhortation, encouragement happening in that. This is how godly leaders lead. All right, so what do we do with all this? I just want to kind of wrap it up and land us here. It's this. As we look at these 5 areas that godly leaders lead, I think we can do a couple things with that. One is this. I think we need to look for and follow these kind of leaders. That we need to look for and follow these kind of leaders. If there's leaders in your life, people you're following, people that you're allowing to influence you, I would ask these questions. Are these the type of leaders that they are? These are godly leaders. Godly leaders lead this way. This is how Paul and Silas led as they went into the church. This is how he's calling the church to lead each other and lead out in this. Would we look for and would follow these kind of leaders? I think we need to also take time and evaluate the mission that we are leading others toward. How are we influencing those around us? The people that we're leading, where are we leading them? Who are we leading? Are we leading anybody? And who can we lead? But where are we leading? That we would lead in this way, that we would lead through instruction and through proclamation and through gentle care and all these ways, that we would lead in this way. And lastly, I would say this. This is what the passage is calling us to, is as you look at this list, you're like, man, who can do that? How can I do that? And I would say that we look to the example and the power that is found in Jesus Christ. Jesus was the greatest leader ever. He was a fantastic leader in the way that he led men and he led women, and he set an incredible example in the way that he led. But more than that, what he does with his followers is he empowers them to lead and to love in the same way. And so this is where it starts. If you're here this morning and you've never come to that place of believing in the work of Jesus Christ, and you've never submitted to him as Lord of your life and began to follow his leadership and his leading in your life, then that is where it starts. We're going to take communion in just a minute. If you're at home, I'd encourage you to grab what you need for that, some bread, some juice. We're going to take communion, but as we do, I want us to remember this, that Jesus was a servant leader. He gave his own life. He laid down his own life for us. He set an example in this, but he's actively equipping, and his Spirit is actively producing these things in us. Through his work on the cross, he paid for our sin, the penalty of our sin, that we might know him that we might follow his lead, his instruction, his working in our life. This is what he's called us to, and we have the opportunity to remember and to celebrate that through the Lord's Supper together. So I'm going to lead us through that in a second. As I do, let me just pray. Let's pray together. Our God, we thank you for your grace and your goodness in our life. God, you have allowed leaders, both men and women, in our lives that have led us toward you, toward hope in you. God, I pray that we would look to and follow those kind of leaders. Lord, more than that, I pray that we would be becoming, growing in that kind of leader in our own lives. Lord, would this be a church full of leaders, of influencers, that we would be leading others toward the hope that's found in you, God. And so I pray that you would continue this work in us. God, that we would sense and see where you are leading us. God, that we would follow this lead, this example that you've given us in Paul, in this letter. God, and we would look to implement this in our own life. And God, we know that this is impossible. We're never going to be able to do it apart from the work of your Spirit. And so, Spirit, we ask that you would teach us, that you would show us where we need to grow, that you would reveal to us, convict us where that's needed, where our conduct does not measure up with the gospel and this message that we believe, that we proclaim. God, I pray that you would show us even now. We ask this in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.